Welcome back to another edition of the Root to Rising podcast. I am Christine Hummel, your host. And as a reminder, this podcast was created to have a platform for women to share their stories about their journeys, to have other women listen, learn, grow, and find their purpose. So with me today, I have another special guest, Jen Norton, who's joining the podcast. And know Jen for quite a number of years during my professional journey. But I'm going to throw it over to Jen to introduce herself. So Jen, welcome to the show and tell us a little bit about your personal and professional brand.
Thanks, Christine. I appreciate the invitation. Hi, everyone. Jen Norton. I am a professional in the market access field within the biopharmaceutical industry. I've been in this for a number of decades now, but never thought this would be where I would end up. So I'm excited to kind of walk you through my personal journey. On the personal front, I am a mom with a 16-year-old son. I live in California with my husband and son and our many, many pets, and just really enjoy my life in both inside and outside of work.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. So maybe with that, we'll start with starting to hear about how your journey started when you went to college or when you were in high school. What did you go to college for? What did you major in? And how did you determine what you wanted to do in college?
My college experience was a bit of an interesting winding road. Let's just say that. I went to a really intense high school. It was a boarding school outside of Chicago that was a math and science charter school, essentially. And so throughout high school, I was taking college level, really intensive math and science classes. And by the time I finished high school, I was as burnt out on math and science as you could possibly be. So I decided to study journalism in college. Very logical decision,
of course.
right? So I went to Ohio University, which at the time was one of the top ranked journalism schools, and just started that path for a couple of years and realized this was absolutely not what I wanted to do. In fact, my second year of college, there were enough journalism majors graduating that year alone to fill every journalist position in the entire country. And so I realized I would need to do some course correction. So I decided to take a 6-month break and figure out what I wanted to do. Got a temp job, actually, by total coincidence, answering phones for a software company, and somehow got my foot in the door in the software world and really spent the first 10 years or so of my career in the software industry. I ended up finishing school kind of along the way as I went and eventually got a degree in business, but just fell into this sort of like IT finance kind of career path and realized that I had a knack for it, that I liked it. And I was doing a lot of travel and doing a lot of learning and growing. So I did that for about 10 years. I did everything from implementations for major corporations. I was a coder at one point, actually developing financial apps. I was doing sales and marketing. And along that journey, I accidentally fell into this area of government pricing for pharmaceuticals. And somehow that was my first entree into the world of biopharma. Not the way that I would suggest going if you're seeking this as a career, but that's how I just sort of fell into it. And I realized along the way that I had a real passion for understanding how our fragmented healthcare system works in this country, how government policy plays a role, and how drug companies have had to evolve and change to support all of the changes in government programs. And I reached a point of realizing if I'm this interested in going deep in this area, doing it for a software company probably doesn't make the most sense, right? So at that point, I decided to jump over the wall into pharma and got my first job at Vertex Pharmaceuticals in Boston. So I was living in Cambridge at the time. Vertex had been a client of mine and I knew people there. And so they were kind enough to bring me in and I started my biopharma career from there.
That's crazy. But it's honestly, the more and more people I interview about how they got to the point they're at, it is not a direct line. It's kind of all these intersecting paths and experiences that got them to where they are today. Like no one plans. You have this plan when you're younger and where you end up is so different. So I'm going to go back there a little bit. So when you were in high school, why did you choose to go to a math and science boarding school? Did you have a passion and love for math and science?
I did. So I grew up in a really small rural town in Southern Illinois. It was less than 1,000 people. And my mom was a math teacher. My dad had a land surveying company. and they were both the coaches of the math team at school. So I'm one of those cool kids. I was a mathlete, and I just, took a liking to math from a very early age. My parents encouraged me to do the competitions and all of that stuff. And then when the school opened up, it was actually a state-run program, and
Hmm.
my class was the fourth graduating class. It was ideated by a gentleman, Leon Letterman, who was a Nobel Prize winner and
Wow.
who was at the Accelerator Laboratory outside of Chicago. We had Carl Sagan was on the board of
Wow.
directors. Like it was a pretty exciting opportunity. And for me, getting out of my little tiny farm town, it was a major inflection point in my life, and it was scary going.
Hmm.
6 hours away from home at age 15 and living in dorms with other kids. But it was the most formative experience of my life. And some of my best friends from then are still the people that I text with
That's cool.
every day.
Yeah, it's hard enough to go to college when you're 18, but you decided to kind of do it when you were in high school at 15, right? Forming
Mhm.
those friendships. So
Yeah.
you had such a strong passion and obviously talent for math and science, right, during high school. What happened that you were burnt out from it and you decided to go to the other side of things, going into journalism? Like, what was that? That's a huge transition. And you were pretty young still, like you weren't even going into college. So, what happened that had you so burnt out? And was it difficult to make that decision to transition to something different as in journalism?
Um, I mean, I think that when I looked at what I perceived to be the math and science types of careers, they weren't things that really excited me at that point. I really liked the logic aspects of math. I liked that sort of problem solving, but I hadn't quite figured out how to translate that to a career. What I did at the time feel I had a passion for was writing and creating. And I thought at the time that I wanted to go into magazine journalism.
Hmm.
I liked the idea of investigating a story and writing something that's somewhat in depth. And as it turned out, I think the things about journalism that I thought were appealing to me are actually things I've been able to apply in my career now. And the storytelling is the part
Hmm.
that I still really love. And in fact, one of the things that I think I probably do the best professionally came from that same spark, I guess, that I had when I was 18 years old.
Yeah, and I've seen you on a few panels and a few presentations, and you definitely present very well, communicate well, and tell a great story. So I agree with that.
Thank you.
So you're in college, and then you swing to journalism. You realize that's not the fit for you either. You decide to take 6 months off. That's for a lot of people. There's other pressures to keep going. That's a huge you know, decision to say, I'm going to stop for a minute, take some time off, and think about it. So maybe walk us through what that decision was like. Were you supported when you made that decision? And then what did you do in those 6 months to help you kind of navigate or figure out what was next?
I think that there were also dynamics going on in my family at the time, and just so life was complicated. And it was one of those things that I knew I was my grades were showing that I wasn't super
Mm,
engaged with what I was doing. I wasn't
yeah,
really getting the joy that I thought I would get from the academic side of it. I didn't want to just go through the motions, and that's something I've never
yeah,
been great at, is just going through the motions if I don't find something to
yeah,
energize me. And I also realized that I just needed to rip the Band-Aid and see what it was like to support myself, pay my own rent. I wasn't
mhm,
having mom and dad covering my rent check every month. This was and it was tough. I mean, I cleaned houses, I scrubbed toilets,
yep,
and I worked some jobs that I never thought that I would be working, frankly. Because of that, I think it's given me sort of an inner strength and
yep.
belief that no matter what happens in life, I can figure things out. And there's something to learn from every job, no matter how entry level or menial it may be.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot. It's if you have an experience or opportunity to do something, it doesn't have to maybe be that long-term solution or that forever solution, but why not try it and expose yourself to it? And you can always learn something from it. And I would say most of the professional women that I have interviewed, they put themselves out there in every experience, kind of taking a leap, right? And just doing it versus having it to be the perfect path. I hear the most feedback where they've done a whole bunch of things, and this is where they ended up. So, I agree, and you have to put yourself out there, take risks. Don't be afraid of it, even if it's not on the same path that you thought you were on. So maybe talk us through, you got your first job somewhere along the lines at that software company answering phones. Maybe talk about how you got that job. Were they interested in you? Were they not? How did you, apply for the job? Because in this job market today, obviously different than when we were applying, it's very competitive, and a lot of graduates are struggling because it's table stake. Is the degree is table stakes. It's the experience they want. So a lot of them are challenged to find a job, and they're looking for their perfect job, right? Instead of looking for just something to get their foot in the door. So maybe walk us through, when you got that software job, even though it was totally outside of the realm of what you knew, or what you even know that you liked, like how you did it and how was it, how you learned from it, etc.
I'm going to take a quick Kleenex break.
Yeah,
The pollen.
I know.
My car is completely yellow right now.
No.
Um, it's a great question, and one I haven't thought about much in many years, to be honest. But I think the software job was initially a temp job just to answer phones,
Okay.
and it was supposed to be for a few weeks.
Hmm.
It was a small company. Frankly, the phone didn't ring very much, and I got bored and decided to start teaching myself some of what went on around there. So
Wow.
this was, I don't want to even say how many years ago it was, but it was, DOS based, Pascal based applications that this
Yeah.
company made for manufacturing. And I was bored to death. So I printed out the source code and I would sit there
Wow.
with a ruler and a pen and try to figure out how it worked while I was waiting for the phone to ring. And, I mentioned that I enjoy logic and puzzles and problem solving. And that kind of kept me really interested to the point that I ended up learning coding and
Wow.
ended up, I mean, it took a lot of pushing, but I ended up convincing the gentleman who ran that company to give me a chance to do something more than answer the phone. And, I think one of my earliest, probably hardest lessons was when I was answering the phone and the owner said basically didn't want me to move into doing these other things in the company because they needed me to answer the phone. And I thought, like, don't ever allow yourself to be trapped in
Yep.
something that's less than what you're capable of because it's too inconvenient for someone to
For
replace
you.
them in that role.
How did you convince them then to let you take a different role?
I started programming and just do it. And I started taking a more active role with the customers who were calling as well. I
Good
mean,
for you.
it was a small company. It was half a dozen or so people, and they were dealing with manufacturing companies right there in the area. And I started building relationships with people as they were calling. And, I kind of reached a point of just making myself too valuable for them
Too
to,
valuable.
yeah, yeah.
Good for you. That's a great story. So you evolved with this software company. It sounds like you were there for a length of time, and then you went to school at the same time that you were working with the software. How did that work? How did you juggle both going to college and working at the software company?
Fits and starts. There's no easy answer to that one.
But you did it. So what was your motivation then to keep you moving forward? I mean, it obviously you had the job, you need to have the job to
Yeah.
pay your bills, etc. But what kept you motivated to be so passionate about moving along in your career at the software company, but at the same time finishing college?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of reached a point. I actually didn't finish college for some time after that. It took a little time
Yep.
to get through the whole thing, but I reached a point where I moved between a couple of different companies and on that software path and realized I probably didn't need to go
Mm,
back if I didn't want to, right? And at some point along that journey, I moved to San Francisco. It was during the dot-com boom of the late
yep.
90s, early 2000s, and nobody cared if you had a degree or not.
Yeah.
And it was really about what you could do and showing up and working. And I think eventually it became career limiting that but I also think that it was just always a nagging thing for me. Or just there's a
Yeah.
little bit of a stigma of not finishing it, and no matter how senior of a role that I had, it was going to bug me.
So then you went back and finished?
I did, yeah, yeah, and I
Yeah.
ended up finishing the final parts of it. I finished online just because I was at a stage in life where I had a baby and traveled, and it was not in the cards for me to be showing up on a campus 3 times a
Yep.
week.
Yep, good for you. So that was a question someone actually asked me the other day if college is still required in this day and age. So I'm going to ask your opinion. Do you think that kids today should go to college, or do you think it's not needed if you get into this super niche industry that maybe college isn't required? What would be your piece of advice
This is a daily conversation in my household right now.
with
Son
your 16-year-old?
my the knack for all things mechanical and electronics and, all of the things that would set him up for a successful trade career if he wanted to go that path. I have said, I at least want you to get a degree in business, if nothing else. And, you can do a lot of, well, hold on, let me scratch that. There are a lot of places where the lack of degree will still be career limiting. Now, that said,
Hmm.
I think that the actual practical use of the information gotten in college these days probably not
Agreed.
going to set young people up for the future and AI and all of the crazy
Agreed.
that's happening in the job market, but still get it. But I take it a little bit with a grain of salt. I would be super proud if my son became an electrician and ran his own small business. I think that would be a great career path. I would love it if he had a basic business foundation so that he knew how to do the administrative pieces of it.
Yeah, no, someone asked me that question, and I actually was surprised at my answer because I said, I'm with you. I think our generation, because it was so ingrained in us growing up, there's a lot for our age. We were maybe the first person or the second person in that family that attended college, right? And so for us, it was like this, you know, the step to get there. That was always the goal. Now I would say, if there's someone that has a passion or they know they want to do something that doesn't need a college degree, I don't know, in 10 years from now, is that going to even be a requirement? I know you talked about your limitations throughout your career because you didn't have a degree, but does that go away eventually? And it just becomes more about being efficient within that industry, within that skill set, especially your comment about AI. Does that replace some of the things we need to bring? I don't know. I was shocked on how I answered it. So now I'm continually asking different people their opinions if college is needed or if it's just our generation thinking that our kids need it because that's what we knew, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is the generation where that answer will come one way or another.
Yeah.
And it's hard as a parent trying to it,
Very.
coach and guide your kid to make the right decisions on that. It's interesting because I get all of these targeted ads now for books for teenagers that are basically like how to be a human, how to write a check, clean a bathroom, and all of these lessons that
Life lessons, right?
they're not getting at school anymore.
So I have you talked about AI and the impacts of AI. So I have a 22-year-old daughter who graduated college last year and she didn't have AI when she went to college. There was no enhancements and she didn't use that for help with homework or anything writing papers. And then I have a 16-year-old who's a junior similar to you in high school and he's very AI dependent, right? And the school is figuring out how to integrate that. And she actually, I was trying to have her use AI to apply for jobs and clean up her resume. And she was so frustrated by the fact that this was so easy to do. Like what she did in college, it would take hours, right? To write the perfect resume or the perfect paper and the critical thinking of how to write the paper and tell the story. And
Yeah,
now it's just you're using an AI tool. And there's such a difference of their use and acceptance of AI, even from just a 22-year-old to a 16-year-old. So I can only imagine over the next couple years how that continues to grow. And it's obviously growing exponentially, but I don't have the answer. But I think it's going to be, to your point, a pivotal point for this current generation entering college, what this is going to look like in terms of entering the job market.
absolutely. And even people more established in their careers, like AI is
Yeah.
so extensively used to screen applications for jobs.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have friends in very niched, very high level careers that send out hundreds of resumes, and
Yep.
figuring out how to get through that AI trap or net, if you will, is tough.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to just commenting and wrapping up the college experience or entering the job market, what advice would you give to younger generation today that may be newly graduated or trying to figure out how to get their first job? What advice would you give them, based on your experience and what you know about today in this current marketplace?
Um, I would say I would say don't paint yourself into a corner assuming that there's one type of job out there that is for you. I think one of the things that's been so eye-opening for me now that I've been in pharma for a bunch of years is just how many jobs there are even within this
Mm.
one industry that I never would have had any reason to know what these things were. I mean, I do market access, which most people have never heard of before, and it turns out I have a huge passion for it, but
Oh,
there's nothing in college that will prepare you or even make you aware that that's a thing. So I think probably my one piece of advice is like figure out what are those things that really do light
mhm.
you up, and what are those things where you do believe you have a knack, and then get really good at telling that story, and figure out what how to make that pitch. Don't just let AI do it for you. Figure out what it is that makes you
Yeah.
special.
Right. Because there still is an element of the person, the people, the human communication and contact. And if you don't learn it early on, you're not going to learn it later on. So I agree with you. I think there's going to be some kind of backlash eventually, 5, 10 years from now, with this generation so dependent on AI. There'll be almost a flip to your point. You're getting books on how to be a human for your son. Like, I think there's going to be actual classes and how to communicate 101 again. Right.
I think so too. I think so.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've realized over the years is that every person, no matter where you are in your career or in your education journey, everyone should mentor someone, because not only are you able to help the person you're mentoring, but through that, you're learning the narrative of your own journey,
Yep.
and you're able to articulate who you are and what makes you tick. That in itself is the most valuable thing that you can get out of being a mentor.
I agree. And for me, I love doing it because it gives me energy. I just love coaching and teaching. But I agree, the more and more you talk about your journey and yourself, even when I interview people on the show, at the end of it, they're like, wow, I never really thought about that about myself until I actually was verbalizing it to you. Because we don't take time to stop and think and look back and reflect. We just, keep moving forward 100 miles a minute.
That's right.
So I want to go back to, you're in the software company and now your leap to, biopharma or that industry. Just to go back a little bit, because I think it is a great illustration of you don't have to stay in one industry, and skill sets are transferable to other industries
Mhm.
if you understand what motivates you. So you always talk about, logic and problem solving are your strong suit. So maybe walk us through how you made that transition, why you made that transition from being in the software industry to biopharma.
So I had gone down a path in my software career of really focusing on manufacturing, automation systems, financial systems, and then eventually contracts and the automation of contractual terms and conditions and whatnot. And through that, I landed at a company that just happened to have a set of software programs that were made for the market access space. So all of the different pieces of contracting, chargebacks, rebates, things that most of this audience won't need to know what they are. Um, but but they hired me to focus on contracts, and then they ended up throwing me into a government pricing implementation at a pharma company in Princeton, New Jersey. And from, my first week, I'm out there trying to understand this crazy new world of government pricing. I didn't even really know what Medicaid and Medicare were at that point. But what I was able to do is use that sort of logic and problem solving to help understand how to take all of these disparate data sources and pull them together to do those calculations that have to be done for reporting to the government. And almost in some ways, I would say that there were similarities in that part of my career to back when I was printing out the source code and trying to figure it out. I was almost kind of reverse engineering my understanding of the financial flows of pharmaceutical companies by doing these, like setting up these government pricing calculations. And then as I was getting kind of more and more expertise, I did the government pricing piece for a number of years. And then over time, the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010. And by that point, I was a senior director within that company, and I was doing a lot of kind of marketing strategy type of work. And I realized that there's this so much more to it, and especially with the changes enacted with the Affordable Care Act. Um, my foundational kind of knowledge of how the transactions fit together is really interesting. But what's more interesting to me is the thinking about the what if and
Mhm.
modeling scenarios of what happens if this changes over here, what happens if the cause and
Mhm.
effect, if you will. And that's a little bit of the creative part of being able to use kind of a technical background and logic and problem solving in a creative way to project the what if. And I think that's a part that's quite energizing.
So when you went into biopharma, how did you convince the leaders to take you on coming from the software industry? Did you talk about your skill set, how it was transferable, or did they see you more as an asset because you knew the software part of things? Like, because it's not today, like I can't imagine in our space, biopharm space today, that you would hire someone from a software industry, right? Even if you have a strong skill set applied, like the knowledge is just very different. So how did you convince them, or what did you do to get that next job at the biopharma?
I mean, in this case, the role that I took was I intentionally took a couple of steps back in terms of
Hmm.
level. So I went from a senior director role in the software side to an associate director role to get my foot in the door. And it was an area where I had a lot of really deep expertise in this one specific area. And it's an area where I think that the pharma company knew that it was an area of risk for the organization, and to have someone with
Hmm.
deep expertise there was an asset. Now, I think what they probably didn't recognize, and I didn't recognize at the time, was that that would be a springboard and that I
Yeah.
would continue to take on more and learn more from there. But at the time, it was a very niche focus for me and a very niche talent skill set that they were looking for that role.
That's awesome, and you said something important, that you didn't look at the title, and you actually took a step back in the title to get yourself into the door of the next industry you wanted to be in. And there's a lot of times, I mean, I do a lot of internal coaching even here within my current company about people come to me in their professional development, and they always come back with, "This is what I wanna do next," and it's a title.
Yeah.
And I'll always pause with them and say, "That's great, but describe to me if you had your ultimate job. I want you to describe what your ultimate job is or what motivates you as part of your scope of work today. What do you enjoy doing? And describe to me what's missing that you don't have that you enjoy. Because people do get hung up in the title, and then you sit in this role that you're not getting fulfilled by because you went for the senior director or the vice president versus the actual job description and the day-to-day function. So can you elaborate a little bit of how you did that? What did that feel like? Was it hard to take a step back? And why did you actually do it? Because it's what drove you to make that decision?
I'll start with that part. I mean, it was a number of things. I had a 1-year-old at the time. I had just gone through breast cancer at the time. I had a job where I was traveling crazy amounts and quite often working until 2 or 3 in the morning. And part of it was a quality of life decision for me. But I think part of it was recognizing that I wanted to move into this industry, and to do so, I would have to start somewhere. I can't
Yep.
expect that I could move from a senior director at a software company to senior director at a drug company. Now, over the years, I've known a lot of people actually who've come from the software side into pharma.
Huh.
Oftentimes, they come over into IT roles
Yep.
and from there try to move into the business. And I've seen some able to do that and others who haven't. But you're right, it's not a common move to jump from one industry to the other.
Was it hard to do it in terms of having to start over from, like, a title perspective, or were you okay with it?
It didn't bother me within the company there. I feel like over the years, I probably at parts of my career where I maybe had less confidence in who I was, I felt like
Mm,
optically, is it going to look bad if people see
mm,
on my resume or if they see on my LinkedIn that I went from senior director to associate? Now it doesn't bother me at all, but I would say earlier in my career, it probably nagged at me a little bit.
yeah. Yeah, well, good for you for taking that leap and transferring your skill set to a new industry, no matter what the title was. I think that's important for people to understand. And so, you continue your career at biopharma. Maybe talk us through a little bit of your career development there, and not so much more about the positions, but what were your goals? How did you motivate yourself to do more? How did you keep yourself, personally energized as well as professionally? And prioritize yourself along the way.
Um, I think that I had a number of either promotions or taking on of greater responsibilities, like in a fairly quick succession within a couple of different companies at that stage in my career. So I'd started out with a pretty small team at Vertex and then got promoted to the next level up about, I don't know, a year or two later. And so I went from a team of 4 or 5 people to a team of um, s- probably 12, 15, something like that. And then I got recruited over to another company, Biogen, and took on a bigger team as part of that. And, with each one of them, I think that there were different pieces of what I was focusing on. And, in some cases, it was just internal processes that weren't working. In some cases, it was talent management and bringing in talent, filling roles, bringing out the best of the people already there and also just learning how to operate in corporate America. I think that the prior industry that I had been in and the types of companies, it was much more like fly by the seat of your pants and less regimented. And learning how to do the corporate America thing was an adjustment for sure. But then when I was at Biogen for, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that, I came into work one morning and then my boss called me into her office and I learned that she was leaving the organization and that they were putting me in as the interim backfill for that. And they would be announcing it to the team in the next 2 hours. So I went from at 9 o'clock in the morning having a 24-person team to noon when I had 125 people and a whole new scope of work that was far beyond what I had been doing in my previous. So that was definitely an inflection point in my career and the most challenging in a number of different ways, but also the most rewarding. And I think it probably grew me way more than I realized when I was in the moment.
When you received that role, because it is, I know the role you're talking about, it's pretty with the head of market access, right? It's a large role. You're responsible essentially for everything in US, for those listening, of how to get a drug to a patient from an access perspective, from insurance to everything in between. But in that moment and she told you that your former boss that you were gonna have that role, did you think you deserved that role?
I think that it was too big of a surprise in the moment for me to even have the luxury of thinking about that. It was kind of like you just have to step up and do it.
Just do it. You didn't even think
But
about it. You just moved forward.
I did I didn't have the choice.
Which is a good point to I think a lot of times we overthink things too much to say if we can do it or can't do it, and we question ourselves. In that moment, you had to do it, you had to execute, so you just figured it out, and you didn't hold yourself back because you didn't have the opportunity or the time to do so. So, in a way, it probably allowed you to become successful quicker without questioning yourself.
Yeah. And I'm glad that it worked out how it did. And at the same time, I've had this discussion with some of my high school besties as we talk about our careers. And, I never asked myself, do I want to do it? And,
Mm.
that's something that I feel like I'm more aware of now at this point in my life that if anything, I wish that when I was younger, I'd given myself the luxury of asking myself, do I want to do something? Because I think that at least my friends and I are sort of wired similarly. We've got our little like inner honor student that's always wanting to overachieve.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do everything.
So if you asked yourself if you want to do something, would it have changed any of the decisions you made in your career path? Would you have said no because you didn't want to do something?
I don't think so. I don't think that there are any decisions I've made that I've regretted, but I do wish that I had actually like consciously thought about it in the moment. It's not a regret per se, but it's more like
Right.
a if I could do it again, I maybe would have
Yep.
carved a little bit of time for that.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a competitiveness in some of us, right, to always overachieve. If it's women or if it's that honor student mentality or just for whatever reason, it's an athletic sports competitiveness. You have that drive to always do the next and do more and you don't question it. You just keep going, right? And so it is an important point to say, do I really want to do this? So again, you're in the right role and you're finding your true purpose and passion and you're allowing time for yourself to grow in other ways, not just professionally. So maybe one question I have is about confidence and you've always portrayed confidence to me. There's a lot of women that I can tell are confident or portray confidence. We don't necessarily always have it in us, and some that don't portray it as non-verbally as others. And so along your software career and then in your biopharma career, do you feel like you've had the same level of confidence throughout, or did it evolve over time as you evolved into your different careers professionally?
I mean, I definitely didn't have confidence through a lot of it. There's definitely a fake it till you make it mentality. But I think that, especially for women, I can't think of a single woman that I know in my network that hasn't experienced imposter syndrome.
Yep.
And it's something that now I feel like I'm aware of it enough that I can sort of push it to the side. But I think it's just so ingrained in our society. And it's not exclusive to women, but I think it's more prevalent amongst women that no matter how successful we get, we're always going to have that little voice in our heads.
Yeah, and do you think that's something first of all, it has a label, which it never had a label before, imposter syndrome, right? So do you think that's something that eventually will evolve and transition out teaching our younger generation about, hopefully this podcast is one of them, but do you think that's just a point in time where this generation feels that? And do you think the imposter syndrome will evolve and change for the younger generation?
I think it's a great question. I would like to think that this is easier for the generations below us as they come up, but I also think it's changing too. And I think, things are tough for young men
Yeah.
coming to the job market now. And it's
Yep.
in some ways, I think that there are a lot more support programs in place for people coming up like we would have at that early stage in our career.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say what it looks like in the future. I
Yep.
mean, I do really worry about social media and self-esteem and self-awareness and what that's going to look like for
Yep.
this generation coming into the
I
the world.
agree.
It's a tough time.
So it is a very tough time, and then you layer on AI on top of everything now, right? Like, it is a very tough time, for these younger generation. So, if you were to give advice on confidence to men or women, anyone from a younger generation perspective, but I do think still what I see is that the younger female generation still lack confidence, especially in the workforce. I'll give you an example that just bothered me. I was at a conference, the industry conference that happens twice a year.
Mhm.
And, the main lobby area, there's tons of meetings going on, male and female. And in the industry you and I work in has probably 20 years ago was very male dominated. Now it's probably getting a little, and that's probably not totally equal, but maybe 70-30.
Mhm.
But there were still women in these meetings, they always had their laptop open, and they always had their face in the computer, and if they were looking at numbers or prepping or whatever, it doesn't matter, and then the men were just sitting there, right? Because nonverbals are very important when you portray confidence in a meeting. The men were just sitting there, just very confident, right? And they had their arms on the chairs and just posture was upright. And the first few times I saw it, I'm like, that's weird. Like, why is she on the computer? And then it was like more and more throughout the whole conference, throughout the week, I kept seeing it. I'm like, is the computer giving them like the confidence? Like they're not hiding behind it, but they can look at something and it's not that they have to be so have their nonverbal. I don't know. It was fascinating to me. And I just noticed that in the conference room. But what would you say, like to give advice of how to fake the confidence even or how to not feel? so much anxiety when you're present in maybe a situation that you don't feel like you have the right skill set or you don't feel like you belong there. Again, all these thoughts are in our control that we put on ourselves. No one's giving us these images. But what advice would you give in terms of, more confidence for our younger generation?
Um, I think recognize it's like the old thing about picture everyone in their underwear in the audience. I think recognizing that everyone in the room is going through their
Yeah.
own stuff in their own heads and they
Yep.
may or may not show it, but everyone has their insecurities. There's nobody out
I
there
agree.
who doesn't.
Yeah.
I think that figuring out your pep talk about what makes you special and what you're bringing to the table. Like your inner monologue has such a huge
Mhm.
impact, and don't let your inner monologue tear you apart. Make sure your inner monologue is building you up.
Yeah, that's great advice, actually. No one's ever said that before, the inner monologue. Like, you're going to make yourself strong. You're the one that has the control of how you show up in that meeting or for that event. And you're the only one that can control to give your own self confidence. So I love the inner monologue. So,
Yeah.
Jen, as we're wrapping up our time here, any last words of wisdom or advice or just rules of the road for anyone listening, personally or professionally, that have helped you throughout, your career journey, your personal journey, that have kind of been your guardrails that you'd stayed adherent to? So, any last kind of pieces of advice?
Always raise your hand, and if there's something that you want, don't be afraid to voice that, and don't be afraid to go ask for it, and be really planful in what you want and why you want it. Be really aware of where that intersection is between what you're good at and where your spark is,
Mhm.
and try to focus on things that are going to check both of those for you. And don't be afraid to take a break and recharge. We all need some time, whether it's an evening or a year. Sometimes we just need time to breathe and to let ourselves catch up.
And be okay with that, right? That's okay. Yeah. And be acceptable of those around us that choose to do that and don't judge,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Time always goes way too fast when I have these conversations. But again, Jen, thank you so much for making time to have these conversations. Again, this is Root to Rising podcast. I'm Christine Hummel, your host. Hopefully, Jen's story was helpful for you to listen to her story, for you all to gain experience, knowledge, and growth. So thank you.
Thanks, Christine.